Hey now! What is up, everybody? My name is Mike Brown, aka Review King MB, and this is the very first time that I am watching this film.
All you need to know is don't try to eat it, talk to it, or put it in your pants.
Don't just
But
stare
why,
at
I
it,
hear you ask?
eat it.
Where is
It's a movie that I would hear about for years. For so long, I'd hear this movie get referenced and mentioned about how it's one of those films that you grew up on. And I guess I missed the boat. Maybe I was born a couple years too late to fit into that category, but I did finally just watch Roadhouse. This is the 1989 film, a year after I was born, so that might explain it. It was directed by Rowdy Harrington. With a name like Rowdy Harrington, yeah, it probably explains the type of movie that he ended up directing. This film stars Patrick Swayze as Dalton. I have to get this out of the way and say this Dalton character, specifically played by Patrick Swayze, is one of the coolest motherfuckers I think I've ever seen in any movie, really, if I'm being honest. And especially because if I think on the surface of Patrick Swayze and what I think of him, when I thought of him as an actor back in his day, I think of more of the romantic type films. I think of him as being this good looking leading man that did movies like Ghost and Dirty Dancing. That's just what pops in my head. That's just some of the movies that I saw of him first. To see him in a film like this, where he is playing this no nonsense, badass, I don't give a fuck who you are or how much money you have, you can't buy me, I'm just a dude who stands up for what's right and takes care of business. I mean, he gets hired by this bar like place called the Double Deuce, and he's essentially a bouncer. I mean, it's probably not the greatest term. Like, I think he's a level above that, as far as he's the guy in charge to make sure shit doesn't go down, to make sure that people don't act rowdy and crazy, even though they do. So it's really his job to just stop things once shit happens. Make sure it doesn't escalate any more than it has to. And I just think Patrick Swayze, this is my favorite role that I've ever seen him play. He was very convincing as this guy who, at the very, very beginning, he had this legend about him. He had almost this myth aura that people knew his name. If you said his name, you're like, oh shit, I've heard stories about that guy, about what he's capable of doing to a human body. And then even when people, because so many people throughout the film challenge him, almost say, he doesn't look so tough, he doesn't look so, because he's not the biggest dude, he's not the buffest dude, but when he does fight, he does handle his business. And I really enjoyed him in this role. I did. It might be easier to say that, well, he's just too perfect of a guy, so how can I relate to him? But I just looked at it as, man, he's the type of dude that we all want to be like. We want to be as cool as him, as tough as him, as badass as him, as good looking as him. I mean, he's kind of the perfect alpha male character. And so there's that. And yes, when I say he's good looking, that's where you obviously have the love romance plot with Elizabeth, who's played by Kelly Lynch. And I liked her because she wasn't just the hot chick or the hot woman that comes in that Dalton wants to be with. I mean, there's a bunch of hot ish women who throw themselves at him or are trying to hook up with him, and he's not interested in just the non-interesting or women who aren't the smartest maybe in the world. He looks at her. She's a doctor, first of all, and second of all, she does feel different. She does bring a certain amount of I understand why he is so interested and why he is pursuing her as hard as he is. Now, I can talk about the villains. There are a lot of villains. The main villain, though, is this rich guy who pretty much runs the town. He has everyone bought off. He has the sheriff bought off. I mean, nobody can touch him. And his name is Brad Wesley. And with a name like Brad Wesley, you can tell that he's a bad guy. That name just reeks of evil fucker. And so he lives up to that name just as far as being a sleazy guy who just, when I say sleazy, I don't mean dirty or gross. I just mean he's so full of himself. He's so rich. He's so always expecting to get what he wants that you just really want to tell that dude the fuck off. And so when Patrick Swayze Dalton does that, you go, yeah, it only makes me like Dalton that much more. Some of his henchmen, one of his henchmen in particular, I instantly recognized and said, holy shit, that's Terry Funk. If you're a wrestling fan like you know I am, I just was like, that's awesome that Terry Funk is in this movie and that he gets a couple of, like, a few things to do. It's not just a one and done. I very much appreciated seeing that. Also, a very small role. You could argue it's practically a cameo. Although I don't know how famous at the time he was, or how, I mean, I think he had been in a few things by this point. But Keith David, he's just the bartender. I mean, it's a couple scenes. I recognized him because I know Keith David. I mean, I know him through the movies, and I like him. I wish he got more to do. He's kind of the only black guy that I saw in the film. And Wade Garrett, I should mention this character because he's kind of the old-time mentor-like figure for Dalton. He's in the same sort of profession, but he's older. He's been doing it much longer. He's played by Sam Elliott. And I thought Sam Elliott was great here as well. I really enjoyed him in this role. It was cool for me to see. It's funny because he's known as the older guy in this movie. He's called Old Man, and he is older than most of the people here. But to me, it's him younger. Like, I'm sure there's plenty of stuff even before this of a younger Sam Elliott. But for me, I'm used to him being even older. So for me, it felt like, oh, this is younger Sam Elliott. Kind of a cooler, more badass Sam Elliott. And I enjoyed how raw and how real these fights felt. There's something about 80s action movies where the fighting, maybe you could say cheesy in some other ways, but I think in most of the ways it's like, man, this feels kind of gritty and visceral, the type of stuff that you don't really get as much as you do nowadays. And there's this one fight in particular, because there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of action. I'm not just talking about bar fights, I'm talking about one fight of Brad Wesley's right-hand man, his number one guy, who goes after Dalton, and they beat the shit out of each other outside in the field, and they're going back and forth. It's a pretty even fight, and the guy grabs Dalton, and he says to him, I fucked guys like you in prison. I out loud said, what the fuck? It was like, where the fuck did that come from? That's way too much information there, guy. I mean, you're pretty much revealing what exactly you want to do with Patrick Swayze. I guess in a lot of ways, we all can't blame you. But overall, I enjoyed the shit out of this movie. I did. I had a lot of fun. I'm not going to say that everybody's going to love this because maybe it's a little too macho or maybe it's a little too... I don't want to know if misogynistic's the right word. Sure, there's a lot of other female characters who don't get treated well, and so I can definitely understand if that's your point of view, but I looked at it as a time capsule film. This is very much an 80s movie that is of its time, and I still do think that there is fun to be had while watching, because I know I had it. So guys, let me know in the comments below if you have watched Roadhouse, which you probably have. I think I'm in the minority of taking this long to finally watch it. What do you think of it? Did you grow up on it? Did you like it as well? Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Later.